Well, Matt, thanks for having me. I'll be honest with you. The number one reason I wanted to come here is I wanted to see another attic studio.
That's right.
Because I got an attic space, and I'll bring you by sometime. But I wanted to come and steal your secrets and see how you kept it so cool, but which you don't.
It's interesting because I've been wanting to do the same for you, so it's good. You kind of set this up, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go check out his studio.
Absolutely.
And see what he's doing up there.
Well, my studio it's closed in with like a slat wall that was not original, but it was done before I got there.
Right.
So at some point I want to rip the frame or the slats off and see what insulation is there. I don't think there's anything. I think it's just the shingles on the other side. But I mean, attics. It's cool to have.
I know.
It looks cool.
And the biggest downside now is I was telling people that this was the only attic studio in Hamilton. It was the coolest one. So now I'm 0 for 2. So now it's not the only attic studio.
I know. Well,
and it's also not the coolest attic studio.
Well, the great thing about attic studios, especially if you have family, is all your clients get to meet your kids as they walk up, and
they get to see your bedroom. They get to see your dirty laundry.
They get to keep your bathroom clean.
That's right. That's the advantage. The bathroom is always clean.
Is it? Yeah, that's right. Because you have clients coming over.
But then, of course, as we're suffering through right now, it's about 38 degrees.
You have no clue. I mean, you might probably see it because it's in HD, but it is insane. But I'm used to this. There's the thing with attic studios. Maybe we didn't talk about this earlier, but I think it's like April and March, April, May. It's just beauty, right? Mm-hmm. October, it's just gorgeous up here. It's like the best time of year.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Make
nice
the best
and cool.
records in
I know,
October.
exactly. That's when bands coming through. If you're going to Scott or you're going to me, you want to be in April, May, or in October. Yeah. And that's when you get the happy producer.
Yeah.
And then
winter, you know what? The winter is completely different from summer because in winter you can layer up, and more, like you were saying earlier, more people.
You get the groups in there.
It's fine. The amps are warm. The tubes are warm.
That's right. You have to make sure that in the winter you're using tube amps, and then in summer it's solid state.
Yeah, exactly. So that's true. I have Christmas lights that aren't LED that go around the whole thing. So in the winter, it's a beautiful place up there. But in the summer, I feel terrible even just turning on my tube gear and turning on the Christmas lights. It's just like the heat goes up.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
It goes up 5 degrees.
Yeah, it's brutal. So I am being serious, though. I'm really intrigued with, and Jay's going to get some great B-roll of this. And when I was first looking into this studio, I saw you have some work in progress photos on your Facebook. So tell me about moving here, how you got into recording, and how you decided I'm going to put a studio in my attic.
Recording goes back a little further.
Go ahead.
So I started as a recording engineer in Vancouver.
Okay.
I started out as a recording engineer at a studio called Ocean. Okay. And we did mostly post-production, did that for about 4 years, and then we moved here, figured I could probably get a job in Toronto. Was a little naive, it's pretty hard, pretty small market, and eventually did get in with the studio there, doing the same thing in post. Worked there for about another 3 years as one of their staff engineers, and then really wanted to do kind of the push to producing music and really not doing the post side, just strictly music. So when we were looking for a house in Hamilton, we kind of saw a bunch of houses. We saw this house, came upstairs, saw the attic, and I thought, that's it. I'll put the studio space up there. It'll be great. Because the biggest thing I've kind of come to realize from when I started to where I am now, when you first start, it's all about gear. It's all about having an Eve. It's all about having, you know what I mean, whatever U87s or whatever mics you can get in. And then you kind of, when you start to kind of understand how those things really work, you kind of realize that it's really not really those things as much as the people behind those things. So, mics are great. If you can have a $5,000 mic, that's great. But if your guitar's out of tune or the guy can't sing,
that's true.
It's not any better than if it was on a 57. And so I really started to realize, I really want a space that people feel comfortable, where they can go up and there's just kind of something about it that when they show up, it's kind of like, oh, I didn't expect this. That's always my biggest thing. I want somebody to walk up and go, oh, you know, I knew it was in your house. I've seen people with house studios, you know, it's kind of in a room, whatever.
I think we felt that way. Just
yeah, I
walking
think
up
most
here.
people do. And then
it's
because
really tall.
most people don't expect, they think in an attic, they think it's going to be like 6.5 feet tall, which are common for most attics. So yeah, I think we're about 12 feet tall in this attic at the pinnacle. Wow. So it's like, so it's really nice. So it's comfortable.
I feel closer to the sun.
You feel closer to the sun, exactly.
No way, it's 12 feet tall.
So yeah, so that's kind of how it is. It's been a work in progress. We've been here 4 years, and you know, when I get a bit of time, I kind of do a little bit more work, and I just keep kind of adding to it. But other than that, yeah.
No, that's cool. Yeah, it is really. So you had to, when you moved in here, it was just frames, you said?
It was basically just frames. They had the Vapor Barrier actually was, some bands, actually, Quick Wicked, they could attest to this. They were the first band that recorded up here when it was just basically, I just cleaned it out, and it was just a hole. And the walls were, one of the Vapor Barrier was I'm not sure how they got it. It was like a poster for like Cirque du Soleil or something.
Oh, really?
And it was this lady's
like
face.
A billboard or something.
It was like 10 feet tall.
No
and it was just
way.
like this giant lady's face. And it was like kind of creepy.
Yeah.
But then kind of funny. Everybody wanted me to keep it, but it was probably one of the first things to go. So.
Did you build the dormer, or was it here?
It was all here.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'm really jealous of this. I want to do this at my place because I don't have a dormer at all. Well, actually I do, but it's like down on the side. It's not out the front, and so it's small and narrow, so nothing can really go down there.
Yeah, I've got one on each side. Both the booth on the other side is kind of the same. It's like.
Oh, there's a dormer over there too.
Is, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So eventually you could get a cross breeze. All I think about is temperature.
It's cross breeze, I know.
I don't think about gear anymore. I think about survival.
I know. People are out.
This has been a bad summer too.
This has been pretty brutal.
This has been bad for music.
It's been bad because it's just like get in, get out. It's too hot.
I know.
You have 45 minutes to mix.
I remember like telling the guys the other night, it's like, write the parts at home. Don't write them up here. So yeah, I've been thinking about doing a dormer because I would like the mix position that you have. Now, we were talking about you not necessarily wanting to waste this space, but I can't get my speakers high enough because all of the angled walls in the ceiling.
Yeah, that was, because it would be nice if it was a little further back, but that's kind of the same issues I ran into. I didn't want to get boxed in, because then obviously you'd have some weird issues there, but it seems to be working as it is.
You like having the home studio? I mean, this is actually, I love home studios. I've had a home studio my whole life, but this is our first home studio we visited, and you know, some people, they get a small space. I mean, actually, Adams at Tape Studios was in his backyard, but do you like it? Is it convenient for you? Would you one day want to move to a?
It has its ups and its downs. The biggest thing, the advantage is that there's no commute. Mm-hmm. Like when you feel creative or you've got a ton of work to do, you can kind of just go at it. Mm-hmm. Pros and cons. Big pro, obviously, it's in your house anytime you feel creative, or if you want to mix till 2 in the morning, you don't have to worry about, you know, being half an hour from your home. Or when I was working in Toronto, we'd take the GO train, so you always had to be there. You have to make sure that you were there for like the last train. But again, going back to like what I'm, you know, when I first started having a studio in my attic, that's amazing. But I'm realizing now that the downside is that I can easily just kind of go up and keep tweaking stuff. And it's hard to really just give yourself a break and really go, okay, there's my kind of 45 minutes. I feel good about this. Let's just leave it. You know, normally you just go home for the day, come back the next day.
You have no choice.
Now I'm kind of like, oh, what if I just did that? And now I'm kind of coming upstairs, and then I'm kind of tweaking stuff sometimes where I'm really like after doing a full day's mixing or an hour or so mixing, and really I shouldn't be because I don't have fresh ears. So that's kind of the downside to it.
Man, I've never even thought about that, but I struggle with that so much. My process is I'll mix, and then when I think I'm done, I bounce the track to my Dropbox, and then I get into bed, go down the stairs, get into bed, grab my iPhone, put my headphone. I like to listen on earbuds for just fresh ears, and I'll listen in Dropbox to the track. And then I would say 50 to 75% of the time, I'm like, oh, that sounds like garbage. And I get out of bed and run back upstairs and print a new mix.
Tweaking,
And
that's exactly the same way. Bounce it right to Dropbox, put on my headphones.
I'm like, what was I thinking? Yeah, and that's
then
really
you go
unhealthy.
like, oh, wow, that wasn't even close. Right?
Yeah. We talked to Dan Edmonds, who is all on tape at his place, and he has no way to digitize his his recordings. So he'll work for the day, he'll go home, and he has
Right.
no way to take what he's worked on and hear it.
Right.
So it's not until the next day that he's back that he gets to
Right.
listen to what he did. I mean, there's
a huge
charm
advantage to that.
Yeah.
Totally. There's going to be a lot less tinkering. I think it's such a huge thing because when you start to, and like they say with the difference between digital mixes and analog mixes, where with a digital mix they say you never finish a mix, you just abandon it, right?
Right.
And I think what I used to do a lot, so on my board, I used to have a 24 IO, and I used to do not just summing, but I broke it down quite a bit, and I was generally summing about 16 channels.
Oh, okay, wow.
And that kind of forced me to leave things because you would go through and maybe you'd bounce it to your Dropbox and you'd listen to it and you go, was that vocal a hair too loud in that section, or the guitar solo, could it go up or down? But then you realize how much work, because I wasn't faders at zero, I was actually doing some mix moves, and you realize,
Right.
is what you want to do, is it worth the effort that it takes to rebounce
Wow.
that mix? And not being lazy, but it's just like,
it's true. Yeah.
With the digital world, you just kind of move it and you can bounce it, you can offline bounce it,
Yeah.
and it takes you like no time.
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, do I want to sit there? I got to do some painting, I got to do this, I got to do that. And then you realize there's nothing wrong with it. It's a personal preference, right? And you get to those points where I feel with a lot of bands where it's like, is it wrong, or is it just that it's not exactly what you thought it would be? And those
Yeah.
are two huge differences.
Totally.
And a lot of the time, you start to realize that there's so much stuff that really, it can be that and it cannot be that.
Yeah.
And it's art, right? So there's no kind of right or wrong. So I feel now that I'm back, I'm 100% in the box, I feel that I'm tinkering a little bit more, and it's something that I'm trying to kind of get back into, kind of, do a mix and just leave it. So that's kind of the downside to having the...
Man, that's funny. I've never even really thought about it. I mean, there has been a lot of talk about how digital is making us indecisive. Too many plugins, too many options.
Mm-hmm.
That is a common conversation people are having now. Now that we all have every option in a way, we're kind of going back. But just from the home studio perspective of being there and having it, I mean, you mentioned offline bounce. Even before offline bounce, like 2 years ago, it would have been that much more of an inconvenience to go back upstairs and reprint another mix.
That's right.
Now it is absolutely, I'll run up, I'll turn the snare down,
That's right.
print the mix, I'm back in bed and it's in Dropbox,
I know. I don't, to be honest, I don't do the... all my bouncing is actually on. I do printing in my mixes, so I have a template where I do printing.
Okay.
And I think that's kind of one of the reasons, because I think if I started getting into offline bouncing, I would be just running up, down stairs all day. And I think there's a degree of, at least, it's like, okay, do I want to actually hit print, sit and wait, name it, then export it to Dropbox and then go down? There's still that degree of like, I almost need that. There's something that pushes me to be like, it's going to be that much more work. So do you feel that it's worth it?
Yeah.
Because then sometimes you'll turn the snare down, go downstairs and go, oh, I turned it down too much, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not mixing, you're just all of a sudden, you're kind of referencing in your head what you've heard on your headphones. So you're not going, I'm gonna sit up there and just kind of retweak it. You just kind of run up, turn it down, and then rebounce it. So you're not making decisions that are smart. You're just kind of like knee-jerk reaction to what you're hearing.
Well, and you're
downstairs
certainly not making artistic decisions or creative decisions at that point. So who are you working with? Like, where do your clients come from?
They're kind of all over, mostly Toronto, some starting from Hamilton now that I've been here kind of long enough that people are starting to know that I'm here.
Yeah.
The record that I'm working on right now is called F. Scott and the Nighthawks.
Okay.
And they are from Toronto. They're a great bunch of guys. Before that, I did a record for a friend of mine. Her name's Rowena Fonseca, who's an artist in Toronto as well, who I knew from out west. And when she moved here, we made a record. It was the first record I did at Boxcar, which we were talking before, and that one came out really nice as well.
What kind of records do you like to make? Do you have a style?
I grew up listening to punk rock. I love listening to punk rock still, but most records, I think everybody for some reason makes indie records nowadays.
Right, yeah.
Like it seems it generally kind of falls.
The genres have blurred.
Yeah, and there's a lot more. Like, people aren't of, like, as much one side. It's always like, we're kind of like this band with a bit of that band and a little bit of this band and some of that band. And the vocals sound like this.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of, like, there's a lot of mixtures. There's not, like, a lot of bands that I find, like, local bands that are really just doing kind of, like, one straight-up sound. Like, maybe they're, like, a melodic punk band, or they're a skate punk band, or they're just a folk band, or they're just a rock band. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that, so anyways, I find I'm generally doing kind of rock, punk,
Right.
I did a lot of prog rock, which I really liked a lot.
That's
Guys
cool.
from Brantford, Quick Wicked, who for them, working with them was always, it was like, you're going to pay me to work on this record. 'Cause for me, it's just
feel
like,
that way
I would do it
sometimes.
and then I just like listen
Yeah.
to the record. And I feel like, should I be listening
Yeah.
to this that much? Maybe it's wrong. But so their stuff, it was always like, I just personally really loved their music. So working with them, I've recorded with them 3 times now. And it's just like, I just always love working with them because every time they come to the table, it's always like, I love that.
That's great.
What they're doing. So.
We talked about drums a little bit at Boxcar. Tell me about your process for guitars, because your guitars are something you can do here.
Yeah, so generally I'll go to a bigger studio to do drums.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get a couple days. The biggest thing that I've noticed over my career, more than anything, is over gear, over anything, is time. Time is like the biggest thing. So the more time for me on a project you can have, and I don't mean time as in like push it, but when you don't have to record 10 drum songs in a day,
Right.
it's always nice. So
Right.
let's say I'm doing an album, if we're doing 8 to 10 songs, generally I'll book at least 3 days at a studio.
Yeah.
And probably the first 4 to 6 hours is just setting up the drums, tuning the drums, miking the drums, checking them, and then
Yeah.
retuning.
Yeah.
So that's a huge process, is really just taking the time. So that's why I like to do as much as I can up here, so that the bigger studio time is really just for drums. It's just dedicated to that, or drum and bass. So we'll do that. We'll do whatever kind of tweaking needs to be done, and then it'll come here. I have a little booth, which we're not going to show you because it's really not as beautiful as this room. And basically, we'll hook up. So the last record I did, we had my Marshall cabinet hooked up with just a 57 rig kind of in the center of the cone. And we had 3 different amps. We used a AC30 and then a couple other Fender, I think Blues Deluxe and something else. And then we just kind of swapped through. So what was nice having the one cabinet that was always mic'd, we'd kind of just use the external out on the amps, and we could kind of just quickly.
So you could do 2 amps at once?
We could do
sometimes?
2 amps. What we'd do is we'd have just the one speaker. So when we had the 3 amps, we could kind of just hot swap
Oh,
the
okay.
plug. So
That's
we didn't have to
cool.
re-mic everything all
That's
the
cool.
time. We kind of
Yeah.
had our setup where the speaker sounded good. It's a speaker that I've had for 12 years. So it's like, I know where it sounds good
Right.
and where it doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's like we kind of hooked it up, and then everything kind of went through that. And then what we'll do is, we'll just play through, pick tones. We had 4 or 5 different guitars, same thing, and just kind of like we'd play. We had our kind of 2, our left and right, which was a Les Paul, and then a Telecaster, which I've got here. And that was kind of
that's
like
good,
your left
yeah.
and your right.
That's good, yeah.
And then kind of everything else in between, we kind of try and find a different tone.
We won't show that room. I respect that. It's so hot. I don't want to go back there. But are you able to kind of tweak sounds back here? And does the sound stay back there for the most
Yeah,
part?
so generally what I'll do is I'll have the cabinet in there, and then I've got just a long speaker cable. So most of the time the amps will actually be kind of on the ground in front of the door.
Oh, okay, so you have
Yeah,
them-
so we'll do a
yeah.
lot of tweaking there. So
Okay.
we can do, we have a little bit more control.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of those, so like the AC30s and whatnot, once you use the external jack, it will bypass the speaker's sound.
Oh,
so
okay.
you don't have to worry about getting the speaker, the built-in speaker and the external cabinet coming in.
okay,
So yeah,
cool.
once you kind of plug it in.
That's cool. Speaking of guitars, you're saying you're a Slate guy. Do you have the bundle, like the,
I
the
do.
subscription?
No, I don't have the subscription because
Okay.
I kind of went to town on a Black Friday once, way before we did the subscription.
Oh, okay.
So
you know,
I
you
was-
can sell all of those. I sold them on, I had VMR
Yep.
and VBC,
Okay.
virtual bus compressors.
Yep.
And I sold them both on Reverb for $100 each US.
Yeah.
And that just paid for like a year of the subscription. The thing was, listen, I know you're going to say you don't like the idea of subscription because everyone else does.
Everything is subscription, but
But they just keep coming out with
I
more
know,
stuff.
I
And
know.
so anyone who's saying, oh, I'm just going to buy what I need,
Yeah.
they just keep coming out with more. Because
Yeah.
they have a S gear that
I know he has added stuff since. There's nothing that I've really that I'm dying
you haven't
for
tried.
that I haven't tried. Well, I did demo. So when he gave
Okay.
it to me, because actually the reverb that it comes with is
Yeah.
probably one of the best sounding digital reverbs, like in the box reverbs I've ever heard. I was like so impressed.
Yeah,
with
it's
it.
really cool.
I know it's tough. $25 US a month.
It's a lot. It's not nothing. But, you know, when they keep coming out with stuff. And
Yeah.
for me, I think it's kind of like going like with UAD. It's like when you go that route, you stick to it, you commit to it. So, but they just came with a de-esser. That's insane.
Yeah,
Insane.
that's the low air or whatever. No, Ilios.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is the Gabrielle or Fabrice.
Fabrice, yeah. Anyway, here's the thing about Slate. We've actually haven't talked about Slate on any of these, although I know Sean, He uses Slate, I think.
He's got the Slate stuff.
But and a lot of people have at least one thing. A lot of people have Trigger. But for me, what I like about Slate is that the whole culture around it is a lot of fun. I like kind of, it reminds me of the Apple days back in like the early days of Apple where, or not, I should say like the early of the second wave of Apple, where it's like, what are they going to come up with next? And that's what I like about Slate is that he's emulating different things, and there's just a bit of a culture, and I just think it's fun. It's
an interesting company because it's like he's like one of those guys where I feel like a lot of people want to hate him. Like it's always about that guy though. Like every time I watch his videos, I can't stand him. And I've never felt that way. I'm like, man, what this guy is doing is insane. And what I love is that his prices are reasonable, and that's the biggest thing that I think. Like you look at a Neve or an API or an SSL, especially Neve, because it's like you want to buy one preamp, and you're like, it's $3,500 for one preamp.
Yeah.
And although I consider them the best preamp in the world, like you look at like a 1073, the reality is that an API 512C is $1,000, and I don't think it is worse than. It's another color, but for, I would rather get 3 of those than one Neve to a certain degree, because like, it's just that it's not going to be worse. It's just going to be different. And so, what I love about he's doing is like when you talk about like the, we were just talking about the mic modeler.
VMS.
So I mean, we'll talk about in US dollars, but like for $1,000, I think it's reasonable.
It's interesting.
You know what I mean? Like I think like.
Oh no, and the plugins have always been. They haven't been sale prices. They've just been $100 or $150.
Yeah, and so what you can get something that's good. It's not $10, but it's not like sometimes with Waves. It's like you look at their diamond bundle, it's $7,500. Like for guys like us, that's a pretty big pill to swallow. Especially because I find a lot of the time there's 50 plugins on it, but there's 35 plugins that I'll probably never use. So that's where what I love about the Slate stuff is like he's gone in a different direction. For him, it's just like, what's all the gear that we all really love, like the staples, like an 1176. Which for me is like, that's my go-to plugin because I love about it. Or even the Warm Audio I have. It's like, it's very musical. You can hit something hard, you can hit it light, you can really do anything you want with it, and really, it's going to be good. Whatever you do, it's going to sound nice. And if you kind of just know how to work it, you can get a drum set to kind of really breathe, or you can get something to really stick out of a mix, which is also really nice, which is what I love about them. But then even just the EQs you get, I mean, like the SSL, like E channel or the 4K, I guess, style EQ, right? Which is, that's what everybody wants to mix on. So it's great. So that's how I generally have mine set up. It's like almost every channel is probably going to be an 1176. And the SSL EQ. And what's amazing for guys like us is that I can have a mix with 50, maybe 50 channels, and I can do it all here. I don't have to have, I don't have to try and fit an SSL. Well, I don't have to try and convince my wife to buy an SSL and then try and fit it up here, because I'm pretty sure that would add quite a bit to the heat up here. So
you have to load it through the window,
and
take the roof off.
Yeah, and that's another thing we talk about, like. There's another thing when we talk about, in the box versus kind of hardware, and people, there's always that kind of like that fight between the hardware is better and the plugins, and the reality is that most big big producers these days, they kind of, you see like the big boards, like guys like Chris Lord Algae, and they have the big boards because that's just their workflow, and I know Andrew Shep recently, like he mixes on a laptop now. Totally. And he's got 2 Neves in his studio. And he's got just a wall of gear. And it was just more, it was like, but this sounds pretty close. And recalling and just your endless options overweighs like that analog side. So I think people who get caught in like, it's got to be an analog world, I think you're not thinking creatively. I think you need to think about think of how fast I can do something. Every time I turn on, it'll be the same. And that's another thing people talk about tape. There's this whole thing about, I bet 90% of engineers that we meet, if they talk about loving tape, most of them haven't worked on tape.
Right.
I worked on tape maybe twice in school.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
So for me to sit here and say, well, it's got to be on tape, it's got to be this. Well, I don't even know what that really sounds like for the most part. So I think it's a lot of people, they kind of dream about these things, but the reality is they don't understand that, U47s, as much as they're an amazing microphone, when you turn it on in the morning and when you listen to something you're recording in the afternoon, people complain that they would sound quite different.
Huh.
So that's a huge thing that people like. So when and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that if that's what you want, but so when we talk about guys like Slate that are emulating these units, like what the great part is that they're emulating them at their best.
Yeah.
And they're emulating the things that we want, and they're kind of omitting the issues that people don't talk about as much, which is a huge advantage for guys like us.
Well, we were talking downstairs when the cameras weren't rolling about the songs, and we were talking about how important it is at that stage, going right back to the very beginning. So I think there are a lot of people who swear by one way. They swear by digital, they swear by tape, they swear by a hybrid. Everyone has what works for them. But for me, it's just, does it sound good? Does it sound interesting?
At the end of the day.
Does it get me excited? Does it give me goosebumps, And some of the records I've listened to, even for me who's interested in this process, I, in a way, don't care. My favorite records, I don't care how they were made. It's just they move me. They excite me. And it's the songs, it's the performance.
Totally. Yeah. And I think if you're going to get bogged down on, your record doesn't sound as good as X record because you don't have that famous, signal chain that someone used on a vocal. Well, you know what? The reality is that that's really not what the problem is. And that's what, when people start to realize that, that's really kind of when you see the difference between like the good records and the okay records, where it's like they are really pushing back to, like we were saying before, it's like you're going back to the song. So if a guitar is out of tune, if it's in front of an 87 and through a Neve console, it's still out of tune when it's put to tape. And you know what I mean? That guitar is still out of tune and still not going to sound good, regardless of whether it's a 57 through Pro Tools into, you know what I mean, or if it's done on tape.
It's funny. I've heard these demos where guys are playing like a drum track or electric guitar or acoustic guitar, and they're doing like a shootout between two mics or between two preamps. Maybe it's like a consumer or a budget preamp versus like a 1073, and the part that they're playing sounds like garbage, or like the guitar to me sounds like garbage. And it's like, I don't like either. I don't want to hear this anymore. You know what I mean? So it's like there's so many variables that. I just, to me, I want to kind of move forward. I want to see what everyone's doing, and I'm just struggling to make a good sounding song,
Yeah, and I think for me, what it's become mostly is like, how can I get to work as fast as possible? So it's not how can I get something done as fast as possible, but how can I just alleviate, like even just turning on my computer and turning on Pro Tools, that 30 seconds sometimes that I feel like it takes. Like, how can I, like that alone, it's like, I want to make sure that when I feel creative or when I want to get to a mix, that I'm not spending time doing hardware inserts, that I'm, you know what I mean? Like that I'm fiddling with a piece of hardware or even with a plugin. Like, as far as even plugins go, I like to have as little plugins as I like to have very little plugins. I don't like to have a lot of options. And then I generally try I buy something or I add something when I feel like I need it. Right. So if I'm like, it'd be really nice to, trying to think of some of the stuff I bought, the Sound Toys stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So it was like, I'd really love to have that wacky delay from like the multi-tap or something. So then I bought it and I use it on almost everything I do now, right?
So I think that's, Sound Toys.
But it's having it set up, and that's a big thing. As we're looking at my Pro Tools, so like having a template. So everything is always works off a template. So when I start a mix, my session looks exactly like this, but obviously without the regions in it. And that was another thing that I used to, when I started mixing, I would like start from scratch. I would like open up blank sessions and make a drum bus and make a guitar bus and make a vocal bus. And then I realized these things took 35, 40 minutes sometimes just to, by the time you made all these, imported the tracks and did all the routing, And then you kind of, that little bit of that juice is kind of gone. And that kind of goes back to that. So it's even like I have everything, like all my plugins are on the channels. There won't be any moves on those plugins, but
cool.
I'll have like my reverbs will all have my standard go-to reverb on it.
Interesting.
And I'll generally start with that. And if I don't like it, I'll add something else. But generally it's all the routing is done. Everything is good to go, because you start to realize that when you start mixing a lot, you quite often do similar things. And I don't mean it in the way that's like, oh, you're just kind of a one-trick pony, you're always doing one thing. But the reality is that like vocals generally have delay and reverb, right? Regardless of what, and sometimes it doesn't. So then you just don't send it to it. But the reality is that
it's true.
Why should you spend the time making those, sending that insert, making the auxiliary, and finding the plugin and all that. So it's like, it's really about having...
Well, if you've done the hard work in one session, you want to just reuse that hard work and what you've learned. Yeah, no, that's so true. Okay, so tell me about this board here. What's the deal with this? You don't see a lot of home studios with a board of any sort.
You don't.
Are we doing okay, Jay?
Yeah. Okay. And my microphone's okay. So the board, I'll be honest, you can cut it out, but I don't use it anymore. The board is like literally right now. Yeah. It was the Talent headphone cue for the last record I was working on. So the reason I do have it, because when I first started, I was in a basement and I was doing full band, so drums, guitars, bass, everything. Yeah. So I needed to have something with enough inputs to kind of support that. Right. So that's kind of how I originally got the Allen and Heath. The school that I went to out west, one of the teachers there who I really, really liked, he had one, and I kind of really liked it. I think it's in its range, it's one of the best sounding consoles in that range. Okay. Other than maybe like you get up to like the Soundcraft Ghost consoles, which they don't make anymore. But everything is very musical. It's very clean. So it's not going to color the sound. It's just whatever you put into it is kind of what you're going to get out of it, which when you're doing, like when I was mixing or doing stems with it or summing, that's kind of what you want to a certain degree. I mean, some people like to run it through stuff so it colors it, but for me it was more like I kind of want to just get everything summing in the board. It doesn't, I can't afford this crazy expensive console, but this is still better than the alternative at the time. So that's pretty much what I was using it for. I was basically running everything through it, and then I would go to just a compressor. Does it work as a controller at all? It doesn't. No, okay. No, that would be kind of cool if it did, but no, it doesn't. Yeah. It's a little impressive, though, for clients. I know, it's got kind of that wow factor. People, and then we just kind of turn the faders up so much like I use it, even though all the mute buttons are on. Is this knob replaced? It is, yeah. I like to mod out all my gear. Okay, there you go. Like the nice big volume. I know so many knobs. I just wanted to know which one was the one to turn down. Do you use it as a monitor controller? This board? Yeah, I know. Then it kind of became a monitor controller, and then it kind of became nothing, and then I brought it back, and it's one of those things where. I'd seen that when I was working at another studio in Toronto, it was hard to, that's when I really stopped using it. It was more just out of convenience because I couldn't mix there. Okay. So if I had downtime, I couldn't mix because obviously they didn't have the same setup. Right. So it really did start out that way. And then when I became full-time working in here, I was like, well, maybe I'll bring it back. And then I watched an interview with Andrew Shep. And it's like, well, if Andrew Shep mixes 100% in the box, and he's got two Neves and all that gear, then I think my, $200 compressors and my little Allen Heath board, I think I can do without. Especially now, like with the Slate plugins we've been talking about, like all the emulations and stuff are in there that you can get very close to that stuff in the box. Yeah. And like I said, when you listen to comparisons online or you go to Gear Slots, and you're listening, they're A-Bing this stuff for you. They're like, here's one that's summed in the box, and here's one that's summed on a console. And you're going, I guess I kind of hear the difference, but like, is that really what, it's like the person at home really going like, this song's okay, but had it been summed through a big console, I'm pretty sure it would have been better. It's like, no. And then it keeps going back and back to the song, and where you realize that like, the summing really, maybe you can take advantage of that if you're working with, if everything is just as perfect as it can be, then those little harmonic distortions and the elements that you get from this expensive gear, then you can really kind of, take advantage of that. But when you're working with like maybe a subpar recording of an element somebody sent to you,
right,
that board's not doing anything for you. Because the reality is that the mic wasn't placed properly, or it's a cheap mic, or there's phase issues, or you know what I mean, or the tone wasn't right for the song.
Totally.
And that's where we kind of keep going back to this song, going back to the song, and then this stuff seems just that much less relevant.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. About some of the AB's comparisons on gear sluts. There's most of the time I can't hear it. Now maybe that's just because I don't have good ears. But at the same time, we've talked to a lot of guys who have great gear. We've talked to a lot of guys who in their studio and they mix. They have a hybrid setup or it's fully analog. And in the case with Dan and. One of the things an argument I heard about gear, because I'm obsessed with gear, I love gear, but I don't claim to say that the gear necessarily makes better records.
Right.
I don't necessarily think they're 100% connected.
Right.
But one argument I heard about gear, and it's kind of just a weird justification, is that in some ways it can make you more creative. In some ways it can, I wouldn't say it completely drives creativity, but I think that when I'm in a studio and I'm comfortable with the stuff that I have, and you know what, I said that wrong. I don't think it makes you more creative, but what I had heard is somebody say that it inspires you.
Right.
And I do believe that. I mean, you look at this room, there's no way to come up here and not be inspired.
Right.
But does this make great songs?
Right.
No. Does somebody look at, a diffuser wall like this and all of a sudden they're like, I'm going to give that record a second chance.
Right.
I hated it at first, but he has a diffuser wall, so I might like it.
Exactly.
But when you come in here, you're comfortable and it inspires you. And so I think there is something to it in a way. I just don't think people have really been able to put their finger on it.
I think what you get, music is so tough because it's just, there's no right and wrongs and everybody has their point of view. And it's what I love about the analog side, if the option, if I could have the assistant and, and you had the bands coming in and you could justify that, then I do understand why people have them, because there is something, touching a fader.
Yeah.
There is something about that.
No doubt.
I mean, in the music,
doubt.
and to a certain degree, it is nice to be able to sometimes it's not always about grabbing a region and just turning the automation up. There's something, there can be something musical about moving a fader that's, 0.7 and then goes up to 1.2 and then kind of back, and it's not perfect. And I think that's really what you can gain from that analog. And I think it's a lot of time maybe a little less of the gear itself, but it's more that it can be inspiring because everything you have is in front of you. Where that's kind of the one downside of Pro Tools is that everything is always kind of hidden. Right. You always have to kind of go into another, you have to kind of open a plugin and then find it. Where when you're doing the analog, I can see that because you could just reach for what you want. And there is something nice about that. But again, it's more of a luxury, and I don't think it defines a record.
No. Yep, totally. I don't see a computer here. What are you running?
It is a MacBook, what is that?
Mac Mini?
Mac Mini.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
See, that's how much I care.
Yeah, I know. It's silent. I can't even hear it.
It's silent. It's actually in the back of the rack.
Oh, okay, cool. And what is this? Is this a TV screen?
Yeah, it's just a standard TV screen, so like a 40-inch screen.
It looks great. It's really big, and you're a bit far from it too.
Yeah, I know it is pretty close.
What do you think? How does it work?
I love it because I can sit a little further away, but I kind of get everything nice and big on the screen. What I like is not have to move too much when I'm editing or I'm recording. It's where I can kind of get a big picture of everything.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't really have to worry about kind of zooming in or getting lost.
Yeah.
So that it's really nice in that
No,
sense.
it's cool. Is there any fatigue that you get in addition, more fatigue?
I'm sure there is.
I don't know. I'm just curious. It looks great. I don't have my glasses on now, but it looks great.
I don't know if it makes it. I switched it to an LED, so it is a little less hot, and
you can see a lot.
I have the brightness down a little bit. Yeah, you can see it's pretty massive.
Yeah,
which is nice. Because as you're working, it's nice to be able to not always be kind of zooming in and out. It kind of comes back to the thing where it's like, whatever, the less movements I can do to get what I want in my head into Pro Tools, that to me is the best thing that I can do.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so let's move over here. So You have an empty 500 series.
do.
I know you're probably self-conscious about that, but there was one we just saw last night, another empty 500 series. To me, it's like I don't have a 500 series, but I would buy the rack first, and then I would just sit there and dream. So
The
tell me.
rack, well, that was exactly it. The rack was on sale.
Yeah, and you knew you were.
I
gonna,
knew, and you
Yep.
know you're going
Yeah, I
to do
know.
it. It was just a matter of time. So I grabbed it.
Sorry, the racks are not cheap. That's the thing, right?
They're not cheap.
It's like half the price of a
These were
preamp.
these were getting cleared out, and I grabbed one.
What is this? Never heard
These
of
are
it before.
Aphex, which they do like the original Oral Exciter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what's great about this one actually is that it has its own monitoring, and it's actually, you can plug it in USB.
So is it an interface?
Yeah, so it's an interface. So you could actually, well, the reason I really like this one, I got super cheap, but I thought, well, with my laptop, if I want to go and do field recording or whatever, do a pre-production, I can just lift
Without
up the
bringing
box and just walk away, and I've got 4 inputs and a monitoring section.
No way. So does, Sean, does Boxcar have this? Is
They
it the
do.
same
They
one?
got the one. Yeah, that was the deal. I got one for them as well.
Oh, man. And so that was the first time I saw it there. I think I had heard about it somewhere else. And they don't make them anymore?
I don't think they do. I think that was kind
'Cause-
of like the end of the line.
To me, this is genius, and I wish I could get one because it's like what we're doing here. I've got to rip out my rack mount interface
and that's what I used to
record
do,
for
yeah.
2 lapel mics. Yeah,
Totally.
And this would just be a dream.
I called Sean one day. I said, "Look, there's 2 of these. There's a couple of these left. It's a great deal.
Yeah.
You won't find us that cheap anywhere else. It was way cheaper than the API 4-slot one,
Yeah.
which I don't think they make anymore either. And as it had the interface, so it's like, if you use it, use it. If you don't, what's great about this one too, I'm sure there are other ones that have it, but this one actually has a channel strip option, which actually daisy chains channel 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So if you have
okay.
a preamp and a compressor or a preamp and EQ,
Saves you the cabling.
you don't have to do the patching. If you
Yeah.
know, kind of like, guys like me, like I generally, when I'm working up here, the signal chain is almost always the same. It's generally preamp to the 1176 into
Yeah.
Pro Tools. So whatever I end up adding in there, it'll most likely, if I added a pre and an EQ, it'll most likely be the pre, then the EQ to the compressor.
Yeah.
Or whatever,
Right.
however I'm using it, and then back into Pro Tools.
So I saw this at Spitif as well. So you could add 4 channels to this?
You can.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do an
awesome.
aggregate device and you could add it in.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So what do you want to put in there one day?
I believe it's always changing, right?
Yeah, of course.
There's so much good stuff out there,
Yeah.
and that's why I've been somewhat hesitant. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be a 512C.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to start
Yeah.
with a 512C.
I would do the same. Yeah.
For the price, you can't beat it.
Yeah.
And then probably the Neve, I can't remember the model, if it's the 517 or whatever their 11 or 1073 version of is.
And the Neve one or
the
BAE?
BAE,
Yeah.
I know, and that's a tough one too.
Well, I have a BAE, and the studio we were at a couple nights ago have the lunchbox, like the DMP.
Yep.
And Mike Keir has 4 500 series BAEs,
Yeah.
but so there. I'm just saying.
I know, and it's one of those things where, and it's kind of goes against everything we've just been talking about, but there's something about the Neve, like for me, I think it's like $100 in price. So the 1073s were the first preamps that in the first 2 that I ever got my job
Right.
in. That's what we had. And I just absolutely love the sound, and there's just something about that Neve name that I do love.
Right.
That being said, I've heard that the BEs are like identical, so I'm sure
Right.
when push comes to shove, I'll probably just grab the BE.
Whatever comes up for cheap too.
Yeah, for guys,
you know.
I'll probably have it forever. So that's why
Yep.
if the Neve one, having like what I'd love is to have maybe 2 APIs and 2 Neves.
Yeah.
And it would be able to kind of, if I have a 2 guitar setup or whatever, that I can kind of have a mimic. Where if I have 2 people and I can have the option of 2 APIs or 2 Neves or
Right.
one of each.
So are you looking to put preamps primarily?
Yeah.
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 Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, preamps too. I mean, I don't know. You've been at this a lot longer than I have, so you could tell me. But it seems like preamps are the things that aren't really emulated. That it's where your source comes from.
Yeah, it's. I've done shootouts before with preamps, and they're all so different. And there's not really a right one and a wrong one. But what I love about the API and what I love about the Neve style, well, I'll say Neve style because there's
Yeah.
tons of great companies that
Totally.
make a similar sound, is that they are very different, and the things that they do are noticeable. Whereas the API definitely is a little grittier, it's more upfront, it's got that punch. So what's nice is that if that's what you want, then get it at the source, right? And that's another big thing. It's like, and if you want something that's smooth and has a bigger bottom end or a really nice mid range, well, then you're going to favor the Neve. I mean, you can maybe get that with an API, but the less EQ you can do, the bigger that element is going to sound. So having those options where it's just like, if you want something specifically, it's nice to be able to just get it right away.
Speaking of Neves, my buddy Glenn that I was telling you about, he's got the Vintex, which also sounds really great. I love those.
I haven't used the 500 series, but I have used their
473.
Which sounds great.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's got the EQ. I don't think their 500 series has EQ.
I don't think they can fit it on, because that's a pretty big box. For 4 preamps.
Although they have Pultec 500 series now, so
they do, but
they can squeeze a lot in there.
They can, because I believe the original Pultecs, and you can totally put like wrong information flashing on. The original
we do
Pultecs
that on every video.
I know. The original Pultecs were not tube based, I believe. They were, I don't know. That part I don't know, the inductors or whatever, but they weren't tube based. So I believe actually it was Lindell that when they made their version of the Pultec, you'll see there's no tube in it, and that's kind of, I was watching a review saying no, the originals were actually not tube.
Oh, interesting.
So it'd be interesting to see what the other ones are based off of.
I'm not sure, but it seems like everyone's doing 500 series. The 500 series that have me really interested is the JHS ones, the guitar pedals. Have you seen those?
Yeah.
They're it's JHS, right? The guitar pedal company, and they've just come out with a series of 500 series for studio use. They have their color box, which is a pretty much just like a Neve. I think it uses a lot of the Neve components, but it has a few other like drive and saturation elements. But then there's I don't know. Maybe we'll overdub once I find out. But I think there's like a fuzz option that they have. There's a delay. I think they have a compressor, but it's all in the same colors that match. It's basically their pedals turned into 500 series. Cool. But it looks really cool.
I love the idea of the 500. What's great is that they've opened it up to kind of everybody, and there's a lot of. I feel like it's also allowed for a lot of guys that are making gear kind of in their houses to make this amazing gear, again, at prices that are not astronomical. And they're able to make stuff that sounds amazing. Like you got, I'm a huge fan of the Warm Audio stuff. And Bryce, like the stuff he does is just like, for the price that he's giving it at, it's like, you're getting an amazing piece of gear. And what I love is that he's showing you that like, it doesn't have to be $2,000 to be amazing, because his stuff sounds just as good as the stuff that he's emulating.
A lot of people say that. I mean, I have the EQP and I love it. I don't own a Pultec, so I couldn't tell you, but I mean, I love it, and a lot of people are saying that. I think from a business standpoint, it says on his website how they're able to get the prices, and it's basically, it has to do with the fact that because of digital and because of not every studio needing a board and needing a tape machine, is that more people are buying outboard gear than they were in the 70s and the 80s. And because there's attic studios like ours, and so there's more people buying it, so they do it in more higher demand, higher quantities, so that can bring the price down than what the old guys were doing it. Plus, it's a small operation. It's like 1 or 2 guys.
And back in the day, I mean, studios, they didn't necessarily have a lot of outboard gear. Like, you generally went to the studio, like bigger studios, for the board. I mean, they would have some stuff. But you even look at some of the big mixers, and there are guys where they just mix on their SSL, and then they have a delay and a reverb, and maybe a couple 1176s. But a lot of it is done on the board. And so I can see where you're coming from. So like the outboard gear, because the great thing about Pro Tools, you can do all the hardware inserts. So with the outboard gear, it's great because you can get out and then back in really
Yeah.
easily. So I can see that, especially with the 500 series stuff, just because it's all right there. It's super simple.
What I love about 500 series is what you said is that so many people are doing it. There's so many options. I imagine it's like, it really is just like the playing cards. It's like of gear because there's just so much.
You have got like a DIY recording, and he does the color palette. So,
Okay.
and it's great. So they can show you how to make stuff like that, and you can make your own, which is also kind of cool.
The one I was really interested in was a Radial has a. Basically, it's a way to plug any of your guitar pedals in as a plug-in insert, and so it's a 500 series. It says 2 jacks in and out, and so then it completely adds any of your guitar pedals lying around into your chain. And I just thought that was pretty cool too, because a lot of great sounds.
I feel there's definitely people are pushing themselves. Like everybody kind of want to make something cool. So there's like the standards that you can get that people love and use, and then there's also like people just doing like, even I love the SSL, they made the Listen mic compressor as a 500 series, so like that kind of sought after compressor that used to be on the talkback mics on the boards, which they had from Phil Collins, that's right, and then which they had a plug-in for, which didn't work for Pro Tools, and then they just made a hardware version of it. So I think that's kind of cool, so like people can, because it's not such a commitment from a research and development point of view, they can they have this technology, the boxes are small, you kind of just make one. Well, they'll make more than one. But the idea is that like it's really, you don't, it's not this massive board that goes along with it. That's $200,000. They're selling them for $800-900. Yeah, I think it's great. I think people are making really cool stuff, and that kind of goes back to like also just getting away from just the staples, but just getting something that's creative, like where you have somewhere it's just like it just crushes a drum set in a really nice way. Or the color palette ones that you can get where you can hot swap. There's 3 different palettes, but there's everybody's making their own type, and it's just like one sounds like tape, one sounds like whatever you want, some type of distortion, or it's like some type of saturation. So it's kind of cool. Then you can have all these flavors.
It seems the new style too is having it controlled from inside the box as well. Some of them are USB, so you can have presets or save your settings in the session. That's kind of interesting. We're running out of time here, Matt. This is a lot of fun. You got a cool place. And I love just talking about, it's funny how we've talked for half an hour about an empty box.
My empty,
but that's what's great about gear. So I'm running a Focusrite as well. What was the decision to get this piece?
The Focusrite is one of the really old ones.
Okay.
It's nothing super special. It's just they're kind of run-of-the-mill channel strip, and somebody was selling on Craigslist. It was a good price, and I thought I'll pick it up. It sounds pretty good. It's my kind of go-to right now, because it's a little colored, but it just kind of gives you what you put in.
I was talking about the interface.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't see this.
I didn't see this guy.
No, it's okay. So what is this called? The Traxmaster?
Yeah, and it's a very simple channel strip.
Oh,
and it's
I've never seen this.
Yeah, it's super old school. It's from like their Platinum series, which they don't make anymore. But it just sounds good.
So we've got a preamp, and then I don't have my glasses. I can't see
EQ
here.
Compressor.
Okay.
And then
is there a filter on it?
There's a high pass on it.
Okay. Yeah. And then an output.
And an output. So it's very simple.
Yeah.
But it sounds good. It's just a good sounding channel strip. It just gives me what I want most of the time. It's mostly because I'm doing guitars and vocals.
Yeah.
It's all I really need most days, because I do run it through the WA.
Okay.
So that one's transformerless, but then you run it into the 1170s, which has all the Cinemag stuff. So you do get that kind of color, and I can drive it a little harder if I want a little bit more flavor on it.
That's great.
So for me, I'm happy with that.
I think channel strips are cool. Until you move to the 500.
Until I figure out what I'm going to do for that.
That's okay, but because you were saying it was old, and I was like, I'm pretty sure this is new.
The Claret is new. I love it. The reason I went with that was the last thing I was running was the Echo Audio Fires. I had 2 slaved together for 24IO when I was doing the summing.
Okay.
It was Firewire, which on the new Macs, they're not really supported that well, so I had a lot of issues with that. So the Claret came out, Thunderbolt. Right. It basically has almost no latency. It's pretty amazing. The preamps on them do sound pretty good. They're based off of the ISA circuitry.
Yep.
They're okay. I still do like the sound of like the TrackMaster better, because then I do also get to run it through the 1176. So if I go directly through the interface, I can't go through.
That's right.
Because I do like to I'll generally track with compression.
Right.
So if I'm doing vocals or guitar, I'll do all my compression while I'm recording. And
That's
that way I
interesting.
don't do in the box after. Just kind of saves me. That's more of a old school with the saving plugin processing before I had kind of track freeze and stuff, and I just kind of kept that. But I find with vocals, to be honest, with an 1176, you kind of just hit it nice and hard, maybe 10, 12 dB of compression.
If you've been doing it, really? Wow.
And yeah, you can hit it pretty hard, and you will hear it a little bit, but at the same time, if you get it right, it's very musical and it works. Like it's that sound that, I mean, it's been on almost every record.
And a lot of pop rock records or pop and rock records, you can hear the compression.
Totally, and and I should say that that's for rock. Yeah, for rock.
Yeah.
You know, if you were doing something that was a little more simple, like maybe you're doing a folk record, I probably wouldn't hit it as hard.
Right.
But anything that's going to be really aggressive, generally, just go right through it. And I know.
So the warm audio, this is what we're talking about now, and this was your way of getting into the 1176.
Yeah, when these came out, I was like, I have to get one.
We've seen them. Did they have one at Boxcar, right?
The one they have at Boxcar, they have because I told them to buy it.
Oh, really? That's funny.
So.
We saw one at Schoolhouse too,
Right.
and they have. I mean, they have tons. They have a Teletronics LA2A, and then they have a Warm Audio 1176.
Yeah, and Warm actually just made their version of the
LA2A.
Yeah.
And they've got. I don't know if they'll announce it at AES, maybe at NAMM in January, but they've got something else they're working on too.
I'd love for them to have a Neve clone. I don't think it's going to happen, but
no. You know what? I think that's where it might go. And with EQ.
That's what I thought
That's
it was going to be when
prediction.
they did the LA2A, like when I first saw it. But I mean, the LA2A is also, I mean, it's such an amazing piece of gear, and they're so expensive.
Yeah.
And it's that same thing I love. It's like an LA2A is $3,500 or maybe even $4,000.
Yeah, I know.
And he's selling for $800.
Yeah, I know.
Which is pretty crazy. But yeah, these are great. When another one came up for sale, I didn't really need two here, and so I called Sean and said, you got to get this because it's for the price. It's just such an amazing piece of gear. And I've done comparisons with the plugins and the hardware, and it sounds amazing. Like, it sounds really good.
You see them in a ton of studios, and we've seen them in probably three of the 5 places we visited. So
yeah, I use it on almost everything.
That's
when
great.
We're doing vocals or guitars.
Well, listen, we're out of time. I wanted to talk a bit about the room, but we're going to come back, and this was a lot of fun. Do part two. But you got a great place, and you know how we were talking earlier about how a lot of producers and engineers sometimes are discouraging or they're competitive with one another. When I was coming over here, I was like, his attic better be as hot as mine or I'm going to hate him. So I'm glad that it is as hot as mine.
It is pretty hot up here. Yeah,
but you have the height that I don't have, and all my tall friends would be really jealous of this. And you've done a great job. And Matt wants us to mention that it's not finished yet, but no studio is finished, man. You got an empty 500.
That's right. So put, the batting's on the wall, and then fill the 500 series.
Well, we do a lot in After Effects, and we give you a ton of gear, and we put in all different,
Hello Kitty poster
Hello
right there.
Kitty. Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. Well, thanks a lot, man.
Thanks for having me,
It's great to talk to you. Good to officially meet you.
Yeah, same here.
Nice. Okay, thanks.